We're excited about a new offering from LDS PMA, an online nonfiction workshop. Do you write memoir, personal essay, or on gospel topics? Are you working on a family history legacy book? Or do you have an idea for a nonfiction book, but you just don't know how to get started? Then this workshop is for you. It's a craft and critique workshop that will help you prepare your nonfiction writing for publication, and it will guide you through the editing and marketing decisions. Check it out at ldspma.org. Welcome back. I'm Connie Sokol, your host of Called to Create, and we are thrilled today to have our beautiful guest. I cannot tell you how lucky we are to have this wonderful person talking to us today about books, about writing, about all things. And this is our beautiful guest, Lisa Mangum today. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. And that was Loki who just walked across the screen. My cat who
Loki is in the house, people.
Demands to be recognized because he is a cat. That's what he does.
I love it.
I'm so glad to be here to talk to you today.
We love you coming on. And this is the beautiful part. I was telling her beforehand, it's very kitchen table wisdom that we share around here, as if you guys are all in this kitchen together. We're all chatting. It's COVID. So I've got my joggers on underneath. I think you might have pajama bottoms. I mean, we are just rolling it like we do, just like a boss. So I love that you have taken time today because we are talking to our audience who are aspiring speakers, writers, musicians, all the things. And they want to know how to make this happen. So today, as I can tell you, there is one word that I would absolutely use to associate with Lisa, and that is books. We're going to talk books today. So if that's what you're looking for, you are going to get this beautiful fire hose because she has loved and worked with books since her elementary school days. In fact, she volunteered at the school library during recess. Can you see the beginnings of greatness? And her first paying job was shelving books at the Sandy Library. And then she spent 5 years at Walden Books working there, went to University of Utah, graduated with honors, did that, with honors, graduated with a degree in English, and then started the publishing department at Deseret Book, been there since 1997. And now you are the managing editor at Shadow Mountain Publishing. And as you know, she has worked with several New York Times bestselling authors, Ali Condi, Brandon Mull, Jason F. Wright. We cannot wait to find out all the scoops. So we're going to jump right in. Talk to us about these early days. I love hearing about people's first love with books. So tell us what it was about books that drew you, or what it is that really sparked you at a young age.
A lot of it was my mom. In fact, probably 90% of it was my mom. My mom was a writer as well. She wrote nonfiction, and she worked at the Ensign magazine. She was the assistant managing editor for the Ensign magazine for many, many years, like 30 years. But when I was little, one of my very, very first memories is taking a copy of The Secret Garden to my mom and saying, "Read this to me." And I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and we sat in the big green rocking chair that we had in the house, and mom read me The Secret Garden. And ever since then, I've had books in my life, and my parents were always great about encouraging me to read and to write. We always had books laying around the house. If it was my birthday, I'm like, just buy me books. That's all I want. And they were so supportive, encouraging of my love of writing and storytelling and reading. And my mom, since she had that background as well, we bonded over paperclips and punctuation marks, and we would talk books and editing all the time. So when I was growing up, I knew that I wanted to be an editor. That was a thing people did. My mom was an editor, and I wanted to be just like her. So that's really sort of what started me on this path to surrounding myself with books and with words and with people who love to create, because my mom did that for me.
That is so tender. And I understand she passed away a few years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, she did.
I remember happening to see a post that you did, if this isn't too tender, but it still stuck with me. In fact, it still tears me up. And the paper clips were a thing, right, between you two. And that it was during an experience you happened to find a paperclip at a really important moment. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I've actually, ever since mom passed away, she passed in 2018, I frequently have found paperclips at important moments. When I was growing up, we always used to joke that we knew we were destined to be a family because Heavenly Father put us together with a whole group, and we all got talking about editing and punctuation and paperclips and writing, and everybody else wandered away, and it was just me and mom left. And he said, "Well, you got to be family then." So we would always joke about that. And after she passed, I thought so much about how we stay connected and how Paperclips can, keep things together. And I sort of adopted it as a little personal totem. And then I started finding them in places when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which my mom also had. The day I went to the hospital for one of my first big appointments after being diagnosed with cancer, I found a little pink paperclip right outside the hospital door before I walked in. And so it was a little moment like, mom's here with me. She still is aware. She loves me. I'm gonna be able to get through this. Just that little moment of connection. And that's a really special thing that I still to this day feel whenever I find a paperclip or someone gives me one.
That is so tender. Oh my goodness. And to still feel that connection. I have to take a second here. I just love that. And that this early love of hers, you were able to connect through it. And I love how it sounds to me she was so encouraging and supportive of your journey. So did you see yourself early on as a future writer? I mean, you saw yourself as an editor, and you are, but did you see yourself as a writer? And then what got you into actually doing your own writing as well as the editing? What's that journey been like for you?
It was a little fragmented, and I actually started being a writer long before I was going to be an editor. I remember in the 8th grade, we had to write our autobiographies because I guess we were going to peak in the 8th grade, and all anybody was going to care about was that. But I remember writing in that autobiography. I like to write, but I don't think I'm very good at it. I'd been writing poetry and short stories and long stories and dreaming about being a published author my whole childhood. And then somewhere in that 7th, 8th, 9th grade, that voice of self-doubt and that imposter syndrome kicked in. And sadly, I listened to it. And so I stopped writing really, 8th, 9th, 10th through high school. And that's when I sort of transitioned and said, well, if I'm not going to write books, maybe I can edit books so I could still be around them. And then, so I sort of stepped off the writing path onto the editing path. And since my mom had done both, she could also teach me and help me with the editorial side. And so that's what I went through high school and college with, the idea that I was going to be a book editor at a big New York house and find fabulous people that do all of the things. And right after college, I was hired at Deseret Book to be a part of their publishing and their editorial team. And so it just happened very, very quickly. And then I've been there ever since for Deseret Book. And I didn't start writing again until like 2007, somewhere around there, when I had this idea for a young adult romance trilogy, The Hourglass Door. And it just sort of like downloaded into my brain one day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to write this down. It's going to be the best book ever written in the entire English language. So, and it's on me. So I'm going to do it. And that's what kickstarted me back into embracing the writer part of me. And then I've written 4 books, and I've done some short stories and novellas and a few other things alongside my path of being an editor at Deseret Book in Shadow Mountain.
That is absolutely gorgeous. And I hope those listening can see that. I mean, those are 4 national bestsellers, just to throw that in there that she's not sharing. But I love how you shared that those doubtful voices, people listening have felt those, and people who are, Brandon Mull talks about that every time you go to do a book. It's like that those voices come back, and imposter syndrome. I love that you named it. And I love that you share how you took that safe path and that just what you could do at the time. And yet it still blessed you to keep moving forward in that dream, unbeknownst to you, when the timing was right and the experiences you've had, and you were able to step into that. So why YA? You read all genres. You love all genres. Why that genre?
Well, and actually at the time I was working on an epic fantasy. My heart growing up was always an epic fantasy, and the fatter the book, the better. And so I thought that's where I was going to be. And that's the kind of book that I was going to write. And I was sort of working on one and had for a little while. And actually it was something my colleague at Shadow Mountain said, Chris Schobinger, we were talking one day about new books coming out, and Twilight had New Moon had just come out, and Eclipse was just about ready to release. So of course that was like the height of the Stephanie Meyer Twilight kind of thing.
The pandemic there. Yeah.
And Chris made this sort of offhand comment about how, like, well, what would you write if you were going to write a YA book? And he's like, why is this so popular? And I'm like, I can tell you exactly why this book is popular. And I broke it down, and I broke down the plot, and I broke down the characters. And I'm like, this is why everybody loves it. And he's like, well, what would you write? And I'm like, I don't write YA. And we were both going down to a conference in Provo that night. And on the drive down, I kept thinking about Chris's question, what would I write if I was going to write YA? And that's when the story just downloaded. I'm like, well, it would have this kind of girl, and it would have this kind of boy, and it would have this kind of story. And in the 45 minutes it took me to drive from my house to Provo, I had like plotted out all 3 books. And when Chris showed up to the party, I tackled him practically. And I'm like, listen, look what I did. I found this story, and I just dumped it all out at his feet. And he's like, you should write this. And I'm like, yeah, I'm writing this. And so that's really, it was just that sort of the right question at the right time. And I was ready for the right kind of story to get me back into putting on my author hat and indulging in that kind of creative expression and that kind of moment that I hadn't had since I was in middle school, really. And I just poured myself into it. And I wrote the first draft in 8 months. And it was published from start to finish. When I very first got the idea to when the book was on the shelf, was just almost exactly 2 years, which is super fast.
So fast.
Super fast.
Oh my gosh. Move over, JK Rowling. Okay. Just say, wow, you just get in, do it. There, it's done. I love the process of that. And I love that you bring up, it was that question that stayed in your heart and wriggled in your mind. And so many of us just push it aside and we go to carpool, or we go, make the donuts for the day, instead of letting it simmer and then taking a step with it and saying, what if this could be? I love that he posed that question. Well, what would you write? Fantastic question. So I want to kind of segue into when you started working at Deseret Book. How was that? It's got to have been intimidating. What was some of the learning curve that you had on editing? Or was it, well, I had so much experience with my mom, it wasn't that stressful. Were there these learning curve pieces as you were progressing and up leveling in that?
Yeah, when I started with Deseret Book, I actually started just as a freelance proofreader. I had applied originally, they had an opening for the children's book buyer in their retail department. And I'm like, well, I've worked at a bookstore and I like kids' books. I'm like, I'll just get that job, and then I'll like weasel my way over to publishing, right?
Make myself indispensable. Yeah.
That's a great plan. And instead, I didn't get that job, but Anne Sheffield, who was the manager at the time, called me and said, we actually don't want you for the children's book buyer position. We want you to be in publishing and be one of our proofreaders. And I'm like, I didn't even have to go through years of a job that I didn't really like. This is exactly where I wanted to be. So I took their proofreading test, and I got the highest score they'd ever seen from anybody on that test.
What? Thank you, Mom. I mean, wow.
And to this day, I got 97% on it. And most people on the same test average about 83 to 85%. It's a hard test.
Oh my word.
And so I'd worked as a freelance proofreader for Deseret Book for a few months. And then Bookcraft, which was still a separate publishing company at the time, had an opening for an editor. So I applied over there and I got the job. And then, so that was 97 when I started working at Bookcraft. And then in 99, Deseret Book acquired Bookcraft. So I was back under the Deseret Book umbrella.
Gotcha.
So that's why I had a couple little different side steps, but it's really been always under the Deseret Book umbrella. And yeah, at the beginning, I didn't know anything. I knew books and I knew story and I knew punctuation and editing marks and developmental. I knew some of those basics, but I didn't really understand like the process of publishing and what that entails and how to plan for it. So I was an editorial assistant for a really long time. And that was great because it meant that I learned every single step of the process.
Yes.
I learned how to do corrections, and I learned how to write copy, and I learned, proofreading, like whatever it was, I had a hand in it to help out everybody else on the staff. So when it came time for me, after 10 years, I was promoted from an assistant editor to an editorial assistant, which is just the next level up. And then I was able to start being assigned books where I was the editor, where I was in charge of the whole process, start to finish, and not helping anybody else, but have people helping me. And so by then I had fallen into it, and I knew how the process worked. And I've just all these years do the same thing every day, but every book is different and every book has its own personality. I'll be working on a cookbook or a middle grade fantasy or a nonfiction or an adult historical fiction. And that's what keeps the job so interesting and so much fun, because I get to meet all these new book friends and help shape them and help get them into the reader's hands, which is where they belong.
It's like you're birthing the books. You are a book doula. That's what you are. I love this. And as you moved forward, now you're managing editor, and we know you've worked with some really big names. What has that been like for you working with them on that level? I remember Sherry Dew talking about in one of her talks that she had a meeting at Deseret Book and you were all trying to get like, let's get a New York Times bestseller on the board, right? One. And then they said, well, no, we're going to get, we're going to make it really happen. And she was like, great. And then walked out. It was like zero chance, right? Not in a diss way, but just like, yikes, that's a big thing. And you ended up putting 5 on the board that year, I think, if I remember correctly.
That I think so. I don't remember how many, but now we have quite a long list of books that have been on the New York Times bestseller. For me personally, Jason F. Wright's book, The Wednesday Letters, that was one that I edited, that I was the editor on. And that did make the New York Times bestseller list. And so I have a little particular pride on that one as well, especially since I found Jason in the slush pile many years before.
And the slush pile worked.
Yeah, it totally, it always works. I mean, you have to be the lucky one that kind of gets through the gauntlet, but I still to this day find diamonds in the slush pile, and my little spidey senses tingle, and I'm like, there's something about this one that feels like this is the right one. And every year I get 4 or 5 of those that I pull out, and we either publish or it gets really, really close. And then somebody else publishes it, which I still count kind of as a victory. Like, I knew it. I knew this was the book. This was the book that was going to get published. And even if we don't do it, somebody else does. And I love that.
I have to share. I just have to. So many moons ago, I submitted my book, Faithful, Fit, and Fabulous, and it got in your hands. And I still have the letter somewhere in some beautiful sacred box that I'm like, don't ever throw that away. This beautiful letter that you sent back, which was, we're not able to accept at this time. You had other ones that you had accepted that were kind of similar and had just acquired. And yet your letter was so profoundly inspiring and motivating. You said, this is well written. And I recommend that you reach out to another Latter-day Saint publisher, because this should be published. It's good. And I cannot even tell you what that did for me. And I did. I went to another publisher, they published it, and then I went on to publish several more, and now 18. I want you to know that you make a difference. And I'm really honest. I try to be so professional, but I'm going to tear up again, because one of the biggest comments that I hear, common comments about you from so many different people, is she is the kindest, most encouraging, most loving person in the book business. And in this area of this role of having to tell people no to their baby, right? Your baby is not gonna fly this way. And you have this gift of kind candor, of being able to share something with someone that may be hard, or work with them to see if they can get it to be just what it needs to be. Where does this come from? Because not too many people have that gift. And I see this over and over. When you talk to someone at a conference, you speak at conferences, and I'm at Storymakers, and I watch how you look at each person. And the only word that comes to mind is behold, where the Savior said, we need to behold people, not just look at them. And you see them for who they are and who they can be, and on their journey, which, we're just also insecure about our writing. Does this book make me look fat? And how do you stay in that space? Where did you get that gift? How do you stay in that space?
I think a lot of that comes because very early on, books were my refuge. They were my safe place, and they were someplace I could go and be transported to someplace beautiful or magical or inspiring or historical. And it really they all just sunk deep inside of me. And there were many, many times where the real world just wasn't going to cut it. And it was just too much and too hard and too whatever. And I could always find a book that matched my mood, or that would lift me out of it, or that story that would comfort me. And so I think I grew up knowing that books had that power and had that ability to protect and to elevate and to inspire. And seeing my mom, her words do the same thing in the articles that she would write for the Ensign, or that she would, work with the Relief Society president on an article or something, that I could see directly how words could change a person and save a person. And because they'd saved me on many a time. And so I think when I go to these conferences, or when I get submissions, or when I talk to people about their books, I feel a great deal of responsibility to respect that journey that they're on, to say, you are trying to tell a story because you know the power that your words have as well. We're in this kind of space to honor the story and what it can do. And so I don't ever want to be the person that says what the voice said to me, which is, you're not a very good writer. You really shouldn't do this. Like, there's no point for you to try to even contribute into this space because nothing you have to say is worthwhile. And that's the voice that I heard from me. And I don't ever want to be the kind of person that says that to somebody else, because there's value in all different kinds of stories. Now, not every story is going to get published. That's the business part of it. That's the reality of being a profitable publishing company. Not every book gets published, and not every good book gets published. But I believe that every story that is written down is important, whether it's just you reading it, or your family reading it, or nobody reading it, or 800 million people reading it. The fact that you took the time to write something down and lay yourself bare on that page, I don't want to come mucking about with my big black boots and crush that. And so I try to be really encouraging and really careful, and to help people see where they might be able to improve, or to encourage them and say, this part is really good. Don't change this. Don't break this when you're reworking, because this part is really good. And so that, I think, is because I want everybody to feel that same kind of safety and that same kind of comfort that I had growing up with my favorite book by my side.
Oh, that is just gorgeous. I'm sure everyone listening is doing the same thing I am. I'm thinking back on those books, those pivotal moments, and you remember where you were and reading it, right? I remember someone saying, I remember exactly where I was when I finished The Book Thief. I remember Harriet the Spy changed my life, and I would go around and fingerprint my family with watercolor paints, like, oh my goodness. The power, like you said, the power of the word, it made me think of the Savior, of how this whole earth came into being by the word. And this creating stories, it is an act of creation, that we are creating this world. It is a sacred space. And this, like you said, this vulnerability to take the thoughts and ideas and very quantum physics, it's all there, but it's not until we observe it and it comes into being, right? That we honor the process, whatever level or stage people are at. That's absolutely gorgeous. I'd love to know too, as you've done this with the writing and helping people and creating that safe space, what have been, I hear writers say a lot of the same things all the time, the doubts, the writer's block, all the things. And I look at the people that you've worked with, and sometimes people put them kind of on this pedestal of, well, Brandon Mull has this down, or Ali Condi's got it down now. And then I saw that she went to go get a writing degree, and people were giving her grief. Why do you even want to get a writing degree? You already have these best-selling books. So what are some of the things you've learned from these best-selling authors that would be good for people listening to know they are just like you, and you can still pursue your dream? They still have doubts like you have, and this is what they do to overcome it, or this is what they've done to keep moving forward in making these stories happen.
The best advice is something that I actually heard from Tracy Hickman, which he and Margaret Weiss wrote the Dragonlance series, which growing up, that was one of those pivotal, landmark series for me. And little did I know when I was young that one day I would be working with him, or be in the same circle with him, or be able to sit down and have lunch with him. And one thing that he said that stuck with me is, he said, I have not yet written my best book, which I really loved, because he was saying, it's not that my other books that I wrote were bad, but it means that there's always space for me to learn something new. There's always a place for me to grow, and something that I could try that maybe I haven't tried before, and that I can continually improve as a storyteller. And I really like that, because it gives us permission to make mistakes, to learn something new, to grow from it, to experiment and find joy in writing and in the process. because it should be fun. Like writing should be fun. We should enjoy it. Like we don't always, because sometimes it's horrible, heartbreaking and difficult, but that's what we sign up for. But I love that idea. So when you do have the depth, when you do have that writer's block come in, when you do look at all your friends who are getting book deals and somehow you are not, or you see the bestseller list and you think, I'm never going to make there. I've been trying 15, 18, 40 years, however long it's been, and nothing's moving. You can remember that there is still and always will be a good book inside of you. And maybe you just haven't written your best book yet. So just write another one. And maybe that will be your best book. Or maybe it's the one after that.
I think Anne Lamott's the one that said there will always be that one book that's in the drawer that will not be published. And I love that, because you've got to go, there's no skipping steps. And I'm hearing this from you. I hear this from so many others. I found this for myself, wanting to try to find some formula to just boom, hit the highlight, right out of the gate. And there is no formula for that. There is no skipping steps. You have to go through those processes, maybe faster, maybe differently than other people, but there isn't any skipping steps, and you wouldn't want to, because you want to keep producing those books. We did a podcast with Jennifer Nielsen, and she was talking about how she had hit that low with the book that she thought was going to totally be published. It was an Wizard's Apprentice or something. Anyway, but she ended up taking pieces from that book that was rejected a bazillion times to make her ultimate national bestseller book. And then all the best-selling books after came from that. So you're absolutely right. And on that note, I do want to ask you, because you have such a good eye and people listening are going to be, frothing at the mouth. What do you look for in a story when you have those spidey senses tingling and this is the one? Are there any points that just surface, that anything that stands out to you, you're like, they nailed it? That's the thing. Something that people could go back and look for in their own writing.
For me, because I'm in the slush pile all the time, and there's tons of books, submissions to look at, and I'm always behind. And
that's a good editor.
Just trying to work my way through it. For me, often what is the first thing that catches me is that there's some kind of invitation for me to keep reading. Because when I come to the slush pile, when I come to a manuscript for evaluation or that we're working on or whatever, I come as a reader first and foremost. I have my reader hat on. I'm still the 4-year-old girl in the rocking chair with The Secret Garden and my mom. I'm still the kid in 8th grade discovering epic fantasy for the first time. I'm still, the person in college who dove into Beloved by Toni Morrison and it changed how I thought about things. Like, I'm still that person, and I will always be that person. And so I want to fall in love with your book. I'm looking for a reason to stay engaged. I'm looking for that invitation. And that invitation can look like a number of different things. It could be a super interesting plot setup. It could be a super interesting genre mashup. It could be a particular line of narration or dialogue that just like catches me. And I'm like, oh, those words, that's nice. That I appreciate the artistry of that moment. It could be, the goal that they're trying to accomplish, the voice of the character. I'm looking for something. And the more of those invitations that I find, the more likely I am to finish reading the first chapter or the second or all the way through. Because if I love it as a reader, I am more likely to be able to champion it to everybody else who has to weigh in to publish it, so that when I put my editorial hat on, I can say, okay, this book is amazing. This chapter is terrible. We got to fix that. And there's some problems with the ending. Yeah, I know, but I know what to do. But oh my gosh, I can't stop thinking about it. Like, that's the experience I want to have. And that's usually the experience we have as readers when we go to the bookstore. We're looking for the same kind of thing. We're looking for an interesting plot, something that a fancy cover that catches our eye, or a character, or something on the back cover that makes us accept the invitation to go on this journey and to experience this story. And I just want to fall in love with your book. That's what I want. I'm selfishly trying to cherry pick the best books that I want to read, that I don't have to pay for, because they come to me in my email box.
And that's a perfect win-win. I love the way you describe that. I call it my 2 a.m. book. Those books that I pick up and I cannot put down. And I know I got a big day the next day, and I'm like, I don't care. I've got to see what happens. I've got to know what happens with this character or the plot or whatever. And I love the dialogue, or I can't put it down. And it's so satisfying. I think there's very few things so satisfying as when you get done with a really fabulous book. And it's like getting done with a great meal and you just go, all the senses are satiated. That was fabulous, right? That was just a ride. And I think you're right. People want to be invited into this world that you have created and want to love being there. So thank you for sharing those beautiful tips on that. You have another book. By the time this season drops, it will be out, but you have another book coming out. Tell us about this project and what brought this one about.
Which project are you talking about?
It's the one on February 11th in the Delicious Stories with a Twist.
Oh, yes, the anthology.
The anthology, yep.
Yeah, Eat, Drink, and Be Wary. So those anthologies came about. I do them for Wordfire Press, which is owned and operated by Kevin J. Anderson, fabulous New York Times bestseller. And again, a person that growing up, I never in a million years would have ever dreamt that I would be on a first name basis with him and like hanging out with Kevin because he's my friend. But he is my friend, and he runs the Superstars Writing Seminar that's held every February in Colorado. And many years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, I had attended for the first time as a guest to be on the panel and a few things. And Kevin had told this story, and he sort of related this idea about the importance of professionalism as a writer, and the importance of trying to say yes whenever an opportunity arises, because you don't know what that yes might lead to. And so he had the example where he's like, if somebody asks you to write a story about a purple unicorn, you better write the best purple unicorn story you can. And I typed in like, well, now I will kind of want to read some purple unicorn stories. And so by the end of that conference, I had this idea, and I went to Kevin and I said, look, what if we do this? What if for the attendees of this particular conference, we do an anthology of purple unicorn stories, and I'll edit it. And then the attendees get an experience of writing, submitting, going through the process of working with an editor, getting published. They'll have a publishing credit under their belt. And then all the proceeds from that anthology can go back to the scholarship fund to help more people come to the conference. And Kevin was like, that's brilliant. And so we did that. And then just every year it got to be so popular that everybody's like, what's the theme for this year? What's the anthology for this year? What are we doing for this year? And so I've done now, I think this is the 7th or 8th anthology that I've done for Wordfire Press, and they're fun. They're a lot of work, I'm not going to lie, but they're super fun. So this last one that's coming out is called Eat, Drink, and Be Wary, Satisfying Stories with a Delicious Twist. And so the call for submissions was it had to have something to do with either food or drink, and it had to have some kind of twist ending that I maybe didn't see coming, or that kind of turned the story on its head. And I got, how many? About 70 stories, I think, that I had to pare down to the 19 that ended up in the book. And I love that process of seeing the creativity that comes up and the stories that come up and the ones that I choose to be in there. One of my favorite ones, and it was the one, as soon as I read it, I knew this was going to be the first story in the book. And I wish I had it right here, and I would read it to you. It's pretty short, but it was, the first line was, "Don't trust the fairies." And it was all about, this advice about like, if you go and if you get captured by the fairies and you eat or drink anything in the fairy realm, like you have to stay there. And that's the mythology, that's the lore. And it was written in sort of this first person kind of warning voice, like, you got to be careful. Like if they offer you, you have to say no, whatever it is. And it goes through this whole story. And then at the very, very end, the twist is the narrator says, but if you do happen to find yourself there, bring me back a bottle of elderberry wine. There might be enough magic left to heal these broken wings of mine. And you realize that it was a fairy the whole time saying, you got to be on your guard. You got to be careful. But if you do, I would really like this back. And I read, it's about 500 words. It's pretty short. And I read it and I'm like, chills. And
I got goosebumps up and down my arms. Yeah.
And I'm like, this is going in the book. This is going to be the first story in the book. I try when I do those anthologies to pull lots of different genres and lots of different styles, and some that have happy endings and some that have macabre endings and some that are funny. And the anthology are some great writers that are in there, some of whom have signed deals with Tor or, have previously published with other big name publishing houses. And some of them are just, this is the first thing that they've tried even to write or to publish. And they're like, I didn't know what to expect, but I guess I did it right because you liked it. And now I've got this publishing credit and now I feel confident in my work. And so it's a really fun experience that I get to do every year.
Wow. That makes total sense to me that you would be inspired to do that. That is a type and a shadow of just who you are and what you do. Having this beautiful place and space that's safe for people to come, share, and then get on that writing path, and you send them on their way. And you're like, I'm right here along the way, like the runners with the water cups. And you're like, you can do this. You got this. How gorgeous. You have not just spent your years punching a time card. You have spent your years changing people's lives, Lisa. This has been a tender thing today. I think of how much you have influenced my life and how I have in turn been able to hopefully influence other women in their realm. And now that's what I do is I teach women how to write their things and get their start. And they're not in your position, but in my little way. And I think that's what's so beautiful is that as we listen to these stories and these experiences and these life lessons from people, one of the takeaways that I get is make it meaningful. Whatever you do, do it for him so it helps others to up level and be their best selves. I know we've talked about so much today, and oh my gosh, I wish we had another hour and we could just get a cup of herbal tea and just connect. But is there one piece of advice or one thought that you would like to leave with those that are listening? They're in all various stages. They're writing. They want to write. They're avoiding writing. They're stuffing down, brownies because they feel like what they're writing isn't good. What piece of advice or thought would you like to leave them with today?
Oh, that's a big ask. There's a lot that I would like to say and have said in the past, but I think for me, when it comes right down to it, I would want people to know that you are important. And the story that you have is important. And whatever that looks like on the other end, whether it's published or unpublished, whether it's something you share with your friends or keep for yourself, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you as an individual, as a writer, as somebody who puts words down on paper or has an idea that they want to share, a message that they want to connect and build a bridge to relate to another person, that is important. And the work that you do is important. And we need those stories, and we need people to be brave enough to tell those stories and to be brave enough to level up wherever they can in telling those stories. Because you never know when your book is going to be the one that a little kid is going to say, read this to me. And that's how we understand ourselves and each other and become closer together, is through the stories we tell each other.
Beautifully said. Absolutely spot on. For those that are listening and are going to be clamoring to find a way to connect with you, what is the best way for people to reach you?
I'm on Facebook at Lisa Mangum. I'm on Twitter at Lisa Mangum. Big surprise. I'm on Instagram at author Lisa Mangum. You can also find me. My work email is lmangum@shadowmountain.com. You can go to shadowmountain.com, the website, to find instructions on how to submit your manuscript to us. Our next open period for open submissions will be March 1st. And you can just send whatever you have in then if you'd like us to take a look at it. I try to be around the block, and I'm at conferences a lot, trying to teach and to meet new people and see what's out there in the big wide world and find people to watch and stories to acquire. So if you can't find me online or in person, my address is no.
We're about to get a scoop. Stalk her at Deseret Books. Yeah.
But really, my work email, or in either Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, I'm on there all the time. You can always grab me there and ask me questions, or tell me what books you're reading that you love, or ask for a recommendation. Let's just talk about books.
You are amazing. And I love how we have bookended this with wrapping up about books. And I have absolutely delighted in this conversation today. You are a gem. This beautiful, uplifting, connecting, and book author cheerleader feel that just emanates from you is just lovely and inspiring. So thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you. It was great to visit with you.
Such a joy. And if you want more of these beautiful podcasts, believe me, you do. These people are amazing and they will help you every step of your journey. Then go below and rate, review, and subscribe. Go to the ldspma.org website and you can find out what the next ones are so that you can get just the thing you need to keep moving on your journey when you feel called to create.